Hey everyone, thanks for hopping on this webinar with us. We're going to go ahead and get started in a minute here. Just give folks a little bit more time to trickle in, so sit tight for a sec. Thanks. All right, everyone. Thanks for your patience there. So let's go ahead and get started with the webinar today. We're going to be covering the Industrial Internet of Things. For those of you who are familiar with our past webinars, this one's going to be a little different, actually. We're calling these sort of instant expert research briefings. So the goal here is to give you as much hard-hitting data as quickly as possible on the industry and the sector to get you up to speed without wasting any of your time. So we will, not take up anywhere near the full hour today, and the format will be a little different. So as usual, we'd love to hear from you and to field your questions. So if you have them throughout the course of Nick's presentation here, there's a couple ways that you can sort of ask us questions. So one is through the questions tab that's on the GoToWebinar tab itself. And then the other is via Twitter, and this will be more interactive with the other participants. So we're at CB Insights. You can also use the hashtag CBIoT, and we'll do our best throughout the webinar to respond to those questions. But unlike in past research briefings and webinars, for this one, we'll probably be getting back to you sort of individually on questions at the end rather than sort of addressing them live. And that's just to keep this really tight and hard hitting. So just in terms of admin, before we kick off, we will distribute the slides and recording after this, so you'll have those within 24 hours. If you do have any technical difficulties throughout the course of this webinar, A, know that you'll be getting all the information later, and B, Citrix does have a good support desk, and of course you can also tweet at us and we'll do our best. So a little bit about Nick. Nick is one of our tech industry analysts here. He covers, IoT, of course, but also areas like augmented reality, virtual reality, drones, and also leads up our wearables research. And his work and his analysis have been featured in numerous publications, including Forbes, Fortune, Wired, and so on. So we're definitely in good hands with Nick running the presentation today. And before he joined us, he was at MakerBot doing research there, and he came out of Hamilton College as well. So again, just a reminder, join in on the conversation at CB Insights, hashtag CBIoT. And then last thing before we sort of kick off the webinar, I'd like to just spend a minute introducing CB Insights itself. So we're a big data and analytics platform that tracks the private company space. So anything from exit activity to investment activity across the world, globally, into startups. And I think as you'll see that the data we present today is both interesting, compelling, insightful, and it all comes from our platform and the tools there that let you really drill down into answering your own questions on your own. And we certainly, have our share of happy customers. So if you're interested in what we can do for you, please, don't hesitate to get in touch. But with that, I'd like to again turn it over to Nick here to lead the presentation with the mindset that we're all about data here at CB Insights, and this presentation will be all about sort of offering you the unvarnished truth as the data shows.
All right, hi everybody. All right, hi everybody, and thanks Victor for that introduction. I'm super excited to get into the industrial IoT, but just to outline what we're going to talk about in today's webinar. First, we'll start with general IoT, what it is, why it's popular, and the emerging company landscape. Then we'll examine where IoT is driving investment, and also take a look at how corporate investors are responding to IoT. After that, we'll dive into the industrial Internet of Things, looking at the subset of startups working on asset-heavy industries and providing technology to areas like factories, oil wells, truck fleets, and that's just to name a few areas there. And also one note before we begin, don't worry about us moving too fast. Again, we will send out the slide deck and the webinar recording at the end. You can revisit that at your convenience. So, what are we talking about when we talk about IoT? In one sentence, we're talking about connected hardware that's collecting and sharing data via a network. And obviously that's excluding laptops, desktops, and smartphones. And this quote from Chris Dixon highlights why IoT is coming into prominence right now. And he says, if you disassemble a modern drone, VR headset, or IoT devices, you'll find mostly smartphone components. And what he's saying here is that thanks to the smartphone revolution and Moore's law, small chips, sensors, and the data networks are now small enough or cheap enough to be repackaged and applied to the physical world, and that's enabling the Internet of Things. And just to give an idea of the economics here, over the past 10 years, the cost of sensors have more than halved to an average of 60 cents per unit. Now here's the market map and a general view of the startup landscape. And when someone says IoT, what first comes to mind might be a connected home device like the Sonos or the Nest. But IoT encompasses applications that span way beyond that. And if you look at this map, nearly all of these categories also have an industrial layer to them. So one example here in the top left, wearables, they often target consumers with fitness tracking bands. But many startups are actually tailoring them for workers in industrial settings. Another example here in the bottom right, you can see with drones. A lot of the hype has definitely been driven by the DJI Phantom, for example, around drones. But increasingly, we're seeing drone startups being funded for industrial inspection purposes. And coincidentally, DJI recently announced it's producing a $15,000 UAV for agriculture, specifically for crop dusting. And while there's an industrial layer for pretty much all these categories, we also included an industrial IoT bubble in the center, or I'm sorry, on the right side, in the center there. And these are industries that are attacking very asset-heavy areas. So oil and gas is an industry that obviously fits that bill. Very capital-intensive processes there. Ground Metrics and Takius do analytics and sensor systems for the oil and gas industry. Also working in analytics for industry and manufacturing, there's Eigen Innovations and World Sensing. Both make a data platform that's tailored to industrial data. And then finally, in that bubble are also APX Labs and Wearable Intelligence. And those two startups are working on wearables for industrial settings. Now here are the funding trends for all of IoT, and looking at the quarterly history, you can see that at $846 million in investment in the first quarter of 2016, that this just past quarter was one of the strongest quarters yet, second only to quarter 2 of 2015. And just for an idea of how this market has grown, over the 5-year period, funding went from $1.2 billion in 2011 to nearly $3 billion in 2015. And taking a look at the most active investors in IoT, We see a bunch of well-known names that invest across stages, but what's really notable here is that among the top investors are 3 corporate venture funds. So Intel, Qualcomm, and Cisco's venture arms are all very active IoT investors, but that's not much of a surprise given that these tech giants either focus on small chips or communication networks, and so clearly IoT investment offers them a ton of strategic value. And similarly, the trend in corporate deals in dollars has grown in lockstep with overall IoT investment, and actually significantly ramped up in 2015, where corporates were involved in rounds totaling $1.7 billion. And that's actually nearly 92% growth year over year from 2014. You can see that huge increase there. Now this is a historical look at the deal stages where corporates are investing in IoT deals. And over the years, corporates are going more and more into early stage deals, which made up nearly half of the deals in 2013, though that number has retreated slightly since then as the industry has matured. Unsurprisingly, a lot of the geography for IoT deals skews heavily towards Silicon Valley, with 59% of corporate deals happening in California. Airware, for example, an enterprise drone developer, which I will talk more about later. They're located in San Francisco, but there's plenty happening elsewhere. So Massachusetts, for example, is home to Rethink Robotics, a company focused on industrial robotics. And New York is home to an industrial smart glasses company called Augmate. So there's plenty happening elsewhere for sure. So let's dive into the industrial side of IoT. And just to get an idea of how big industrial IoT is, let's take a look at the quarterly financing history here. Similar to broad IoT, the industrial side of Internet of Things has steadily been growing. It went from $208 million in 2011 funding to nearly $1.2 billion in 2015. Now, another way to visualize this is to compare funding in industrial versus all of IoT. And in this graphic, you can see how industrial has gradually increased its share in overall IoT funding. And actually, this past quarter, industrial represented more than 1/3 of all IoT funding. And the industrial IoT wave is definitely still in its infancy. 51% of deals in the past 5 quarters were in the early stages, so that's adding up seed and Series A. 1/4 of deals were in the middle stages, and only 10% were in the later ones. But in the coming years, we expect to see today's crop of startups mature and see these stages even out a bit more. So when we're talking about industrial IoT, we're not just talking about factories with sensors, but really any setting that's asset heavy. So this graphic from McKinsey shows levels of digitization by industry. And if you look at the far most left column here and try to look for red, you'll find industries like chemicals, mining, transportation and warehousing, construction, and agriculture all have relatively low levels of digitization currently. So software hasn't eaten these very physical, very asset industries yet. And one way to think about industrial IoT is as a means of bringing that digitization and capturing data on the moving parts of industry. So we were inspired by that, and we recreated the graphic using CB Insights data to spot opportunity within IoT. And this is a breakdown of deals by IoT sub-industry. And the data here echoes the prior idea. And if you look at the very top here, health and wellness, for example, made up mostly of consumer fitness bands, that has a pretty solid green band across the years, indicating some deal saturation. And if you look towards the bottom of the graphic, we see relatively few deals went to startups in manufacturing, warehousing, and industrial, and that's second from the bottom. Then other categories with low deal density included supply chain and logistics, wireless, and lighting/LED. And another interesting thing that's going on here is with robotics, the category that is 6th from the top. This sub-industry includes a lot of the warehouse automation companies like Rethink Robotics and ClearPath Robotics. And you can see how deals have gone from pretty dark orange, maybe even red in 2011, to really solidly dark green in 2015. And so more attention is definitely being paid to bringing these areas into the 21st century. Now here is the market map of industrial IoT. And at the center, there's the cloud platform, which can be thought of as the workhorse for collecting and storing the data from sensor networks. So BitsDo, TempoIQ, and the recently acquired Jasper Technologies are all great examples there. And to highlight a few of these areas that are feeding into the cloud, there's utilities, which can be smart metering, but that also includes connected lighting and HVAC. And startups like Enlighted are focusing on quantifying that in commercial spaces. Other networks like Impinj and CargoSense are supply chain startups that allow intelligence on location and movement and allow for that to be tracked in real time. Connected fleet networks like Green Road and Telogis are tracking fleet location and telematics. And using various techniques like machine learning, AI, they're big data companies that are helping analyze the ocean of often unstructured data that industrial sensors and sensor networks produce. So Uptake, Mana, and Sight Machine are all great examples of analytics platforms that tailor their services for data made by heavy industry. So next we have the most well-funded industrial IoT companies, and two of them, Census and Tendril, they provide solutions for smart metering for utilities companies. Alien does RFID tagging, that's like radio frequency tags, which enable IoT logistics and supply chain tracking. And also Telogis makes a platform for the connected trucking fleet. Now this is a list of the most active investors in industrial IoT. And when we drill into the industrial side of IoT, we see an even higher concentration of corporate venture arms driving the bulk of the activity here. Among the most active was GE Ventures, Intel Capital, Cisco Investments, Kleiner Perkins, and Qualcomm Ventures. And there's plenty of breadth to these investments, but just to name a few of them here, Impinj does radio frequency tags for the supply chain. Ayla Networks is a cloud platform for IoT manufacturers. And Skycatch develops drones for surveying and rendering construction sites in 3D. And a very useful way to visualize these investment connections is using our business social graph. And here we visualize those top 5 industrial IoT investors and take a look at their most recent bets inside industrial IoT. So you can see that the connections here on Airware link between Intel Capital and Kleiner Perkins. Relayer was a co-investment of Kleiner and Cisco. And BitsDo Systems saw investment for both Cisco and GE Ventures. And all this activity was happening just in 2015 and early 2016. And so this business social graph is a very useful tool for understanding the connections between investors and startups. Another interesting fact about industrial IoT is that industrial IoT companies have a higher, on average, Mosaic score if you look at the top quartile there. So what Mosaic Score is, it's our proprietary algorithm for company health. It runs from a possible 0 to 1,000. And Mosaic scores are based on what we call the 3 M's. There's momentum, there's market health, and then there's money. So this is combining data from financing history, investor quality, hiring and jobs activity, industry sentiment, news and social media, and several other sources. So interestingly, when you look at the top quartile of industrial versus the top quartile of all other IoT, on average, industrial IoT startups have 18 more points than the rest, which is small, but it's a significant trend because this is seen over hundreds of companies. So where is IoT going? Well, to give a little context on the state of industrial IoT, I want to revisit some important industry news. So a little over a year ago, a German steel mill's office network was infiltrated by a hacker who prevented the blast furnace from being shut down, and that caused massive damage to the facility. And that whole debacle brought the issue of cybersecurity to the forefront. And then later in 2015, we saw many of the public tech giants announce massive bets in IoT. IBM, for example, invested $3 billion into its own IoT unit, and Amazon announced a $100 million fund to support its Alexa voice control platform. In September, we saw that President Obama announced a $160 million pledge for smart cities, which will grant new funds for technology that reduces traffic and improves city services. And then later in September, GE announced that its Predix industrial IoT platform was going to generate $6 billion in revenue in 2015. So getting even more recent, 2016 has already seen several important industrial IoT deals. Very recently, we saw a $30 million Series C to Airware, which develops commercial drone software. Andreessen Horowitz, Kleiner Perkins, and former Cisco CEO John Chambers were involved in that deal. In February, we saw a massive exit to Jasper Technologies, a cloud system for IoT. Jasper was acquired by Cisco for $1.4 billion, putting it among the largest IoT exits of all time. And in early 2015, a little over a year ago, Sigfox, a French networking company that focuses on IoT communications, they raised a $115 million Series C. So where is all this going? I think in 2016 we'll see investors piling on to the industrial side of IoT. And not only because there's still plenty of room for startups like we saw with the heat maps, but also because these are very, very valuable business problems to solve. There's just tremendous opportunity in making an oil well, a factory machine, or a truck fleet just 1% more efficient. Next, I think we'll see cybersecurity will definitely be a large part of the conversation this year, with that German steel mill that was compromised and consumer products proving hackable. Security is definitely going to need to be built in, and you'll see more companies like Mocana or Bastille tailoring it for the enterprise side of IoT. This year, IoT subsets like AR, VR, and drones will definitely take off. We've already seen some asset-heavy leanings in Q1 with financing to Airware's industrial drones and to DAQRI's augmented reality headset that's used for industrial workers. Then I think we'll also see more government participation and interest in smart cities and smart utilities projects that are enabled by IoT, given the recent government pledge by President Obama. And then lastly, I think the analytics layer will continue to grow beyond big data. And some are calling this big context. Systems for the industrial IoT are extremely complex, and we'll see heavy investment in analytics tools that go beyond just a simple dashboard, for example. There's increasing demand for innovative ways of slicing data, like using AI or machine learning on data sets. And I think Mana and Site Machine are two great examples there. But I also think VCs will jump on these types of startups right now, and companies that squeeze more juice out of industrial IoT data, be it with AI or other data science techniques, these companies are extremely well positioned because they build a very strong data moat. And by that I mean they generate a feedback loop with more industrial customers, they get better algorithms working out, and then with the better services, the more customers they'll subsequently get. And that kind of virtuous cycle, that feedback cycle, that'll benefit greatly from an early start. But that concludes everything I have prepared for you today. And thank you all so much for listening. I know you're probably wanting more. This industrial IoT area is an area of ongoing coverage for us. So stay tuned for coming research and more full-length webinars. And we will be, again, fielding questions on Twitter if you use the hashtag CBIoT. I'll do my best to answer. And if you want to find me, my handle is @N Papa G. So NPAPPA-G. And again, we'll send the slide deck and the webinar recording at the end. You can revisit that. But thanks again for tuning in, and I look forward to bringing you more in the future.
All right, thanks again, everyone. And I think Nick did a great job covering a lot of material there. Again, all of that data that you just saw comes straight from the CB Insights platform. And I think, we have a lot of powerful tools that let you get cutting edge insights into the trends, into what's next, into which players are interesting. So if your business is looking at that kind of data and if it's important to you, we'd love to show you the platform and let you sort of play around with the tools on your own and really drive insightful questions. And lastly, I think Nick mentioned as well, our blog at cbinsights.com/blog has dozens of IoT related articles and data sets that are highly worth checking out. And then please do stay tuned for future webinars that go into depth on other subsectors. So thanks again. I see a flood of questions coming in here on GoToWebinar as well. We'll be reaching out over the next few days to try to answer as many as we can individually, turn them into research, etc. So have a great day, and we appreciate your time.